Good afternoon. I want to call back into session the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors meeting for September 6, 2017. And we'll call the roll, reestablish a quorum, and then we'll go into board reports back and deliberations. I want to thank the audience, too, for being with us throughout the morning and afternoon. And with that, Flo, I'll turn to you to go ahead and call the roll, please.
All righty. Supervisor Cerna?
Here.
Kennedy?
Here.
Peters?
Here.
Frost? Here. Natoli?
Here.
And you have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Gill.
I think the three items that you identified as we went to break, those are the items that are in front of you and your deliberations. Any other questions you might have on the budget?
Okay. I think we did have a question Mr. Cerna had asked as we were breaking, so I feel like I saw you punch up. So, Mr. Vaughn, you may want to respond to Mr. Cerna's question.
Yes, the board can be very specific in a request for interest or a request for qualifications or just a generalized request for proposals.
But we can do that on the spot today.
Sure.
Sorry, could you repeat it? I couldn't hear what you said.
You can give direction to staff to prepare a request for interest or qualifications very specifically. That's done with some frequency and to what your interest is, whether it's capability or financial wherewithal or past practices or prior audits, all those things.
Thank you.
So is there some distinguishing factors between an RFI, an RFA, RFQ, and so request for interest? Because we got into that, Robin, as you may recall, last year on RFA, then turned into what basically equivalent to an RFP. So if there's RFI, and there may be some timing and some other sequencing, and I don't know if the law makes distinguishing elements between those, because again, I think your answer to Supervisor Cerna seemed to open the door to the ability to make a decision as it relates to setting money aside and then giving specific direction regarding looking at a specific set of services, whatever criteria it might be. It might be geographical, it might be service-oriented or whatever. So I guess some help with that as we deliberate.
At the moment, we don't have any money for any of the three. So do you have to appropriate the money first?
Well, yeah.
But I just want to be clear on the process. I agree. It may be a moot point.
Pardon me?
I also agree. The question was about process, not about funding.
Well, I thought Don was asking for steps on how to go through it, so I wanted to make sure that got in the mix.
Okay. So there are different levels of which requests can be made if we find the money.
Yeah. I think once we get to that, you give us direction, we can come up with the appropriate tool to use, if you will.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. Was there any report backs then before? How'd you get away without any report backs, Britt? That's probably a first in history.
I think we set a record. There's none that we got.
Okay. All right. Then I'll turn to my colleagues and then we'll just open it up for discussion. We know some of the requests. We have the recommendations before us. There are three outstanding programmatic requests. There's the what to do as it relates to any future workshop on Mather-related items, and then anything else that we want to. We had some other correspondence too that people may want to talk about that came in during the course of the last few weeks. So, Mr. Cerna.
So, just a point of order with our county council. I just want to be careful on behalf of my colleague, Ms. Peters, about any motion that's made that has as part of it some interest in having a future workshop on Mather. Do we need to separate out the motion, so to speak, to avoid a conflict? Or?
Yes, we do need to separate out Mather specific, but on whether the board wants to put a calendar item on for a Mather workshop is something that is.
Are you talking about what we talked about earlier in the day?
Yeah, when you were out.
Yeah.
Just because there was.
Oh, I thought. So you mean to get a specific date in October or some other time to come back?
The direction I was looking for is just come back sometime no later than second meeting in October. That's all.
Okay, so that doesn't sound like that's.
No, that's not a problem.
Be a conflict. So I guess, Mr. Chair, just for the sake of getting through this afternoon, I'm not sure how you want to do this directing traffic, but maybe find out what the level of interest is by board members on the three requests first, so that we don't go too far down a path by one or a minority of us when there's not enough interest to fulfill a desire to seek augmentation of funding in a process.
Okay. No, I think it's fine. So if people want to weigh in, again, I'm not necessarily seeking a motion at this point in time, but just general thoughts about, and I certainly can express mine, but I wanted to give my colleagues benefit too, so we can work right to left or start with whoever wants to punch up.
Well, I would just go first and generally say I hold in high esteem and value all three organizations that have made, I think, in their own ways, strong cases for us to, in our deliberations, find creative ways to consider augmenting their ability to continue to perform in the ways that they have served this county in the past. And so I'd be interested in hearing others, of course, but I would like to see all three funded. And if that means that we need to get a little bit in the weeds today, so be it in terms of process.
Okay.
But that's my general position.
Okay, good place to start. Mr. Kennedy?
I guess one of them that I'd like to point out, and again, I preface it with, as Supervisor Cerna said, they're all great organizations that do good work. Nobody is arguing that at all. But I'd like to point out South County Services request and just kind of walk through it just a bit, just so you get my point of view. And that's that, I've always been in this subject area, which we went through months ago when we did the RFP, interested not in so much who gets it as I am that the services are provided for the people in the south part of the county who need these services, and also a transparent and clean and deliberative process. I think we went through a deliberative process when the staff evaluated RFPs back when, and it was the board's decision, though I was a dissenter in that decision, to not follow staff's recommendation. And I said then, it has nothing to do with South County Services and their abilities, and from my opinion, because I don't have an opinion, being that I sit here and I don't have the expertise that our staff had when they actually evaluated the RFPs. I am as most of you know by now, a stickler for following processes that have been laid out and not changing the rules of the game late in the game. And I felt like we did that. I feel like that perhaps one of the criteria that staff was probably considering, and if I remember right, for making the recommendation that they did to the Salvation Army was financial wherewithal. And I think here we find ourselves in a position that, had we followed staff recommendation, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion right now. So, there's that part of it. And also, other than maybe the Florin Road project, I don't remember doing 100% change order. That was facetious, by the way. That was for Phil.
I twitched.
But so it's a small amount of money relative to our budget, sure, but it's a large amount of money in relativity to the contract itself. And I think we are taking what I believe we did as a smelly process and making it smellier. If we do in fact need to allocate these dollars to the South County folks who need these services, and we can identify the funds to do that, and that I'm going to preface everything I say on all three of these, I want to identify the funds to do that. Then at the very least, I think that instead of quote unquote augmenting to the tune of over 100%, a contract, I could not support that. So I would at the very least ask that we go out and do a fair competitive bidding process on that one.
Okay. Other members of the board want to weigh in? Any thoughts?
I guess I can.
Yeah.
Are you I concur with Supervisor Kennedy in that I don't have knowledge of some of these organizations. Others I do. I think Splash has a wonderful program. but my understanding is that there was a specific contract for a specific period of time, and the contract ran out. And so my thought is...
The contract didn't run out. They ran out of money before the contract was finished.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, Splash, the contract's over.
Oh, I thought she was talking about, okay, different, pardon me.
I was talking about Splash.
Okay, sorry.
I don't know if those kind of services are needed somewhere else, or if we're required to have those kind of educational services somewhere else where we can include Splash in an RFP for those kind of services to get another contract consummated. I could say, I've been out to Splash, and I think what they're doing, their work is good work. And so, but I don't know if that's is that a program that we are required to fulfill, or what were we fulfilling with that contract with Splash? What
I'm going to have Michael
requirement?
Peterson answer that question.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Michael Peterson, Water Resources. In terms of the most recent Splash contract and the requirement to carry out that specific service with that entity was cited in our stormwater quality permit. We had we were awaiting renewal of our stormwater quality permit from the state. So we had an extension of our prior permit, and one of the extension requirements was simply that continue with the current outreach education programs that we had in place. Upon receipt of our new permit, we don't have that requirement. We have the discretion to identify the outreach education programs necessary to meet the basic criteria for the permit. We do already fund a program called Splash in the Class, which is a classroom-based creek education type program. And we've been doing that for a number of years, and we're going to continue to do that. And that is where we will meet our general outreach and education requirement under our permit. With our new permit as well, we have a requirement to remove 100% of trash from critical portions of our storm drain system. This is trash 5 millimeters or larger, 100% removal, or the equivalent. We're going to be spending the next 18 months trying to figure out how we're going to do that, and we don't even know yet how much that's going to cost. So part of our determination in reprioritizing programs for the stormwater quality program is how are we going to reassign funding to those new requirements that we're going to have to attack over the next 18 months. Absolutely agree that Splash is a great program. The reason we're not pursuing a new contract for the field services is that it's not necessary. I mean, so it has been a great program. We have supported it, and we do still support Splash in the Class, which is an adjacent program. But really, we've got additional priorities weighing on the stormwater quality program that are requiring us to reprioritize funding.
And are these contracts, like, everyone's here on the last day, but did they know their contract was coming up, and so they had time to plan their revenue streams?
Well, clearly the contract had a termination date, and the prior amendment to the contract, we had indicated that looking ahead, we were going to be reprioritizing and determining how to prioritize funding, because we knew that there were additional requirements that would be coming with our stormwater quality permit. But again, Splash is a good program, but we do have in place what we need to meet our requirement for outreach and education, and we really are concerned with the additional costs that we're going to be facing with this trash amendment to our permit.
Okay, thank you. And then on...
So before you leave, can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, just...
Yes.
Michael, what you've just explained obviously talks looking forward, but I don't know how much dollars in that overall stormwater utility. This is not a general fund activity. It's stormwater charge. It has to be a nexus there, and obviously you get advised on that. But the request is for $114,000. I don't know what sort of physical infrastructure improvements might be contemplated. I do think that one of the focus needs to be is that keep trash out before it ever gets into the waterways, because clearly trying to get 100% of anything is, nearly impossible. But the state's pretty good about telling us how we ought to do things and how much percentage.
Right.
But I guess my point being is that there is funding available for it if we chose to fund it. Because you're still looking at a window of 18 months or longer. Things may be years in the making, as far as I know. I don't think what you can develop in 18 months is going to get 100% of the trash out of the waterways. Maybe you've got your eye on some design. So I guess my point being to the question, though, is that there is funding available if we choose to. Again, it may not be your recommendation, or it might be, but nonetheless, there is sufficient funding available if this board chose to do a contract for another year, so to speak. Basically, what was outlined by Emily in her request. So
right, and I think it's good to understand that historically the Splash Field program has been a vernal pool-based program. Relative to our stormwater quality permit, we look at creek-based education programs. At a very high level, it's general watershed education. But when it comes to considering whether to enter into a contract, I really do have to consider the nexus related to just the source of funding and what it's intended to do, as well as using that funding effectively. And we have been in discussion, is there a way to tweak the program to make it more creek-based? But that aside, is that still a service that we actually need to take on relative to our permit needs and our overall program priorities? So that's where we are right now. Yes, there's funding there. I mean, we have funding within the stormwater quality program, but it's a matter of how are we prioritizing that looking ahead.
okay, thanks.
And so just to finish with Splash, I guess my thought, and I know it's a wonderful program. I've been out there and I've seen it impacted me the way I think about water drain off, stormwater drain off. But I also have to say that I don't know the intricacies of Michael's budget and what he's looking at moving forward, and those new requirements that we're continually having to do, jump through different hoops, and so we don't have the luxury to always fund programs because we think they're great. We have to use the money in every way to maximize what we can get out of it, and so my thought on that is deferring to staff's recommendation is probably what I would have to do based on just they're the ones that know what they need in order to meet their budget requirements. On South County versus Salvation Army.
Well, it's not actually that. Let's be clear. It's
okay.
That was in the past.
Decision was made. Yeah.
Okay.
Salvation Army doesn't play a role in this. I was just giving historical perspective.
So South County lost the contract, right?
No.
They didn't win the
correct.
bid.
Or they did not win the RFP, the bid.
They won the RFP, came to the board made the decision to award the RFP. South County, the issue in front of you is that what the RFP was for and what it takes for South County to run the operation are two different numbers. So the augmentation that's being asked is
They won it, but they won half of what they wanted, basically.
But they got what we had put out on the street. So we put out $140,000. That was the discussion we had with the board members, and they won that RFP.
And when was
Since
that? When was that finalized?
October of 2016.
October of 16. What has happened since then is that South County was receiving additional funding through SETA for another $160,000. That funding has dried up. So the question that's coming back to us is that we have a contract with South County, and to run the program as South County does it, there's a need for the additional $160,000.
So they're asking for new money from the county.
Correct.
I see.
That money.
And they're asking us to fund 100% of their program.
Pretty close.
90 to
it.
100%.
Correct.
So, I mean, my thought on that is that that's difficult to fund 100% of any program. I'm not sure we have that luxury, and I don't know if I could support that. And then regarding St. John's, I have concerns about what our county council has mentioned, and so the impression I have is that we don't have a choice. We have to go out for an RFP. We can't just hand money to an organization. Is that correct? Or we're making ourselves liable for problems?
It can't be sole sourced, and for the protection of spending that kind of money, you need some kind of process, and a competitive process would be the most transparent.
So what I will say about St. John's, that is an organization that raises a lot of money outside. They are using a lot of private funds, so we're maximizing, what we get out of what we put in. It seems like, in the number of beds and the low number of recidivism. So they're actually taking people from homelessness that aren't going back to homelessness. So it seems like they're doing good work, and I hate to leave them. I'm not sure we left them stranded. I think they might have known that this was coming. I'm not sure. I think that there's been a timeline and that there was question, but for us to just not try to figure out if we could help in some way, even if it's with an RFP, I would probably want to support what their work and find a way to give them a bridge to some other to the next year at least, so they can figure out different funding. But I want to do it. I would want to do it in a way that makes sure that we're doing it the right thing.
Okay.
So those are my comments.
Okay, thanks. Supervisor Kennedy, I think you had a question back on splash. Supervisor
Michael, can you come back up, please? Thank you. I just want to be crystal clear on this. So what Splash has done in the past was necessary at one time based on requirements, and it no longer is. But and you're kind of, still formulating your plan of moving forward.
Correct.
Okay, so for all you know, once you have that plan and you've thought it out long term, there very well may be an opportunity or a need for these types of services in which Splash could then apply.
Conceivably, yes. There's nothing precluding that. Future requirement or need might be fulfilled specifically by these services. However, or I guess what more to the point, those services, if they're revised towards being creek-based, which is what the focus of our program is, rather than vernal pool-based, it's not precluding that there might be an opportunity in the future.
So, but again, fine point on this. In your opinion, at this time, those types of services that have been provided in the past, you just don't need them.
That's correct. And even moving into the future, the question you raised, it's unclear. As we understand, some of the future rules that will be in place for school districts, they'll have to craft their own stormwater quality education programs, which really would usurp the need for us to do that, and they would have to be more or less carrying those out more directly.
All right.
So,
thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Peters.
Thank you. I'm not going to address Splash because I won't be able to vote on it. South County Services, I feel similar to Supervisor Kennedy, that there was another nonprofit that was selected in a process by staff, and we had a discussion here at the board and overturned the staff recommendation, if I remember correctly. So I would have trouble making an outright award. I think it would have to go out to competitive bid again. On the services that they provided and the term, and if you could help me understand some of it. So what they spent the money on was 9 months of services or 6 months of services for a 1-year contract, something?
I'm going to have Ann answer. She has specifics.
They're
on
not
this.
out of money right now. They're going to run out of money in December, so they're funded through December. But when they lose half the money, they're going to run out half a year. So they're not out of money yet. They're still in business.
Okay, so I guess I need some dates as to when the contract started and how much work was done. And
Right.
Here comes Ann.
And I think if there's specific questions too, be on staff. Mary Lou's still here too. But
Okay.
Well, I want to keep this at this
Okay.
level.
So the contract was effective on July 1st. And
Of 2018
of this year.
or 17?
Yes, and expires June 30 of
Okay.
next fiscal year.
Okay.
I am awaiting staff that are going to send me a report of all of the services provided to date, but it's my understanding that they do have money through the end of December, is roughly.
Okay, so they would have spent all the money that the county provided them within a 6-month term of a 12-month contract?
Right.
Is that?
That's correct.
So are they at any legal jeopardy of signing a contract for 12 months and not having given the services? I mean, would they have to repay the money, or, I mean, how does that all work?
That's problematic. Yes, they entered into a contract for 12 months for a set amount of money. I don't know if there's any leeway in that for extending the time or shortening the time, but it would be the subject of negotiations to change it from what it is.
And to be
Go ahead, Ann.
To be completely clear, Ms. Powers made it very clear when she signed the contract that with the loss of this money, she would not be able to make it for a whole year. She was worried about her current cash flow at that time, and I recommended that she sign the contract so that we could get money flowing to her and that we would have to then address it as we are today.
And the other thought process, Ann, was to at least get
Okay.
6 months' worth of services in that area.
Yes.
Yeah, I got the 6-month of services. My question was more about when you sign a contract that says you're going to provide a year's worth of services and you spend all the money in 6 months, are you liable in some way for the 6 months you didn't provide for? But there's a confusing element here. Ann said, the county recommended that she sign the contract.
If we were in dispute, that will be something we would look at. We knew when Ann had the conversation, that was a known fact that she didn't have enough funds. We were expecting her to have the funds to do the full year. So we will now go back and try to address that issue. We're interested in getting 6 months' worth of services. Then the issue becomes on January 1, what do we do?
So if the group were not to get funded, who would provide the services for January 18 to June 30th, 18? Or would they just there not be any?
There would not be any. I mean, we would probably have to.
Otherwise, you're paying for it twice,
Right.
sort of. And were these RFPs that where the money became unavailable to balance out the contract, or
Money-
contributions from the private source, or what?
No, it was money that that the provider received from SETA. And I do believe that there's still an opportunity for them to apply from some of the CDBG money, or I'm not using that term, can't remember which one it is, but for some additional funds through SETA. But we flowed some money from CalWorks to SETA that allowed them to free up some money for South County services, and the CalWorks money is not available this year. We had a $12 million reduction in our CalWorks allocation this year.
Is there any opportunity that they've explained to you that there's a way, they still have a couple months till the end of the year, that they're going to get any money for the last half of their contract?
I have not had that conversation with them, no.
And how did we come about the amount of money for the RFP?
We did a needs assessment prior to issuing the RFP, and then based the amount of funding that we would put in the competitive selection process as a result of that needs assessment.
And that's where the 140 came from?
Correct.
Okay. Well, no. Not right now. Thank you. Well, that one's a struggle for me. Sorry. And then St. John's, I agree. Good work. They have a good board. The problem with the process, they lost a competitive bid, and to my knowledge, they did not protest the RFP, which seems like the time you would, you would address losing it. I'd also like some clarification on how they are using the funds based on the letter that came in front of us during the presentation, and if that use is appropriate.
No, we would like to have that discussion too, because based on the information provided, I need Ann down here again. I think there's questions that we were having over break too, or lunch break. Ann?
Why do you always sit in the back row?
She wants her steps.
She's hoping she would have called on.
She's exercising her
And I
ankles.
apologize, I didn't hear the question.
Good.
I wanted some clarification on how St. John used the funds as portrayed in the document that they gave us today, or they gave us yesterday, but that was in the presentation, if the use of the $700,000 is appropriate.
Well, I just saw that today for the first time, and it's hard to tell. What we are funding is children and families stay in a shelter bed. The letter made it look like that we were matching some other funds, and I'm not sure if that's accurate or not. We would need to dig deeper into that. Our contract does not allow that our funds be used to match, to draw down other funds without express permission, and we haven't had that conversation. But I don't know for sure that that's in fact how it's being used, but it would certainly be something we'd have to look into. We pay for families to stay in a shelter.
So you pay for services,
Yes,
not matching other funds or
that is correct.
leveraging the money.
Correct.
So they do that at their own peril, basically.
If that's in fact what they're doing, yes.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, but Nav, are you saying you have some question if that's what they wrote in the letter is actually what's happening?
Well, that's what we want to figure out, is based on what Ann, that's not permissible under our contract.
So that's our language in the contract. That's not the federal government or, the pass-through, the agency where the money comes through?
That's our language.
That's our language. And what would be the reason for that language?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I have to get
I
back
think
to you on that.
basically what we're buying a certain level of services. So if we have a contract with you and you said you're going to do
Well, it's just like South County in that sense.
If you're going to do ABC, we expect you to do ABC.
Mm-hmm.
But if you end up backing our money for loans or anything else, paying for debt service, again, that's what was on the slide today. We want to verify that. I don't want to go too far into it. That is not permissible. That's not what we contracted with you.
Per the existing contract.
Yes, the
or
existing
the history of contracts with
Yeah.
St. John. Doesn't mean necessarily that a fresh contract couldn't be redesigned so that we understand, for instance, that, maybe the money's used for match, or maybe the money's used to securitize other funding, as long as that total assemblage of commitment is used for the intent to provide the services, right?
It's what services are we getting? And I think the caution we will have there, based on what happens today, is the public purpose behind it.
Sure.
And the public purpose question with the county council that we've been talking about, if it gets into matching our funds or matching loans, what's the public purpose that the county got out of it?
Right, so
that's
that it's
what we
not
gotta-
a gift of public funds,
Yeah,
right?
rational nexus we got to create.
Right.
Well, so that letter or document that came in, was that referring to this particular RFP, or was that referring to how the money's been used in the past?
The impression is, from what we saw today in that letter, is that how the money was being used in the past, how the money is leveraging more money. And that's the dialogue that the department needs to have with the provider. Is that just an illustration, or what's the purpose behind that? Our contract is for 19 units, not to backstop or do anything else that we saw this morning on the screen.
Could I just ask a question on that? But if you buy 19 beds and they provide the service, however that money goes into it and how it may show up on their sheet, the net effect is the same. That we buy the service for the women and children, so you get 60 or 50 or 60, and then they may show that it's over on their income sheet, but I mean it's revenue for services provided. So they have a loan. But I mean, if they don't have that income and can't provide those beds, then other things fall out. But I didn't get this, that they use that to back up their loan. I mean, Michelle is here, but I didn't read that the same way as it's been interpreted, I'll just say.
I was very careful, Supervisor Natoli. What I said is what's been represented to us. It appears that way. We need to sit down and figure out what that really means. If it's on surface, it's being put up there. Our money, our county money that's going in, if that money goes out, there's a loss of $3 million. We just need to be very clear that that money is not being used to backstop anything else. And if it is, then the contract provisions that Ann said kick in. Again, I want to be very careful. I'm not saying that's what's happening. That's what's being represented, and we need time to understand what that is. And then the number of units we have, there's more information's coming in. That's all we're getting at. I think that's what Ann's saying too, is that we just need to understand what that number is.
And there is an performance audit component in the contract, allowing for a review of things like that.
Well, how would you if we put together another RFP? How would you review in advance? I mean, isn't that a little strange?
If there was a question of the performance of these contracts, and my understanding is that has been undertaken on the South County.
South County, we're not talking about South County.
I'm sorry, what's that? You've already done an audit of the past contracts, or it's in process?
No, but that's a component of the contracts that were entered into, that if the past performance is a question, we have that ability.
Okay. I just...
You're probably thinking the same thing I am, a little chicken the egg kind of.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you structure an RFP and tell them how to answer it? That doesn't seem quite right. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. I want to weigh in. I know Supervisor Frost, you wanted to, I'm just giving general thoughts here, and then we can come back to the specifics. I'll just start with the St. John's. I think that certainly some of the questions raised have already kind of addressed some of the points, but in my view, we've had, with all of these organizations, a long-standing relationship. They've endured audits. They've had to meet contract requirements, and may have competed in processes either that they were prevailed in or not. But I think that, for me, again, you want, wise use of public dollars, and you want to be able to track those dollars and make sure that the public is ensured that they get the value for those dollars to the discretion that we have as a board and as a county to, contract for certain services and program elements. With St. John's, it's clear to me, as it is with the other two, and I'll speak to those in a moment, that we've had a very strong partner, one that's been able to grow their support base dramatically over the last few years, and that may be reflected even some of the conversation a moment ago about taking on debt that allowed them to expand. But when I think about 270 beds for women and children in this community, and I even reflected when I saw the point in time count, which that has all the elements that people can talk about and agree or disagree on. But that was the one area where we were actually showed a bit of improvement as related to, at least addressing some of the needs in that point in time count, 2 years over the 15 over 17 calendar years, but or point in time counts. But I think that what we have with St. John's is a program that certainly has grown, and it's grown in a way that I think has proven results. It certainly has benefited many women and their families. I think there's cost savings associated with it, and whether people can track those directly or not. But when I think about what we spend in the children's protective system and in the foster system and the reunification alone, if you can shortcut some of those stays, better quality for the children and hopefully for the families, but certainly just cost savings alone. And the fact that we're 24 days out really is of concern to me. I think that provides a level of urgency here, and however we figure out to do this, I think that there needs to be, at a minimum, some ability to bridge this over while we figure it out. I mean, typically we don't just end contracts and leave people in the lurch without at least telling them that's coming. And in this case, obviously, we told them in the sense that we went out to an RFP for transitional housing, but that was a choice this board made. And I guess I want to come back to the point, anticipating next week's discussion. It still hasn't been demonstrated to me that in a competitive process, the transparent process that we went through, that's going to come to this board for consideration next week, that if we supplement the amount of money and we have 2 qualified proposers, why we can't choose to fund both of those proposers. If you don't, in this case, we know is Volunteers of America is in St. John's Shelter. And to this very moment, respecting what council says, I still don't understand. We have a process. We said we will go out to the marketplace. We put a certain dollar amount to that. We want to double that dollar amount. And we want to fund both of them. The record could bear this out. I believe that in the past we've been able to do that. That if we found more money or decided to put more money, we could do that. And so I guess I'm going to suggest very strongly that looking towards next week, that if this board is inclined to supplement, that we look at doing that and buy those. Again, you have to have the performance, you buy the beds and so forth. However, we tailor that, and I don't know if that allows enough time now to your point about looking at those aspects. But that seems to me to be a clean process. It's an open process. It's one where you have both of the parties that proposed, the only 2 parties proposed for it, will be before us. And so I guess I would, again, bring it back to that point. That seems to me to be, now, if that's not a path, then we got to go out in some other way. But I'll just say I'm very supportive of finding funding for a partner that I believe delivers and is a part of that continuum or that spectrum of what we provide for services, and it gets people out of homelessness and actually into self-sustaining situations in many cases, and employability. And to hear Nicole's comments here today and Sheila 2 weeks ago, there are more stories, and they're not the only provider that can bring people in and tell good stories. But I think a mechanism is there. That's my view, and there may be disagreement between our top staff, and I guess if so, but in my view, we have a process that we've gone through, and if we want to supplement that process for people who met the minimum qualifications. And so I don't know, I guess Nav or Robin, is that being looked at for next week? We've
had numerous discussions with county council on it, and the issue that we keep coming back to is that when the RFP was sent out, it said 1 provider. So that's what's going to come to you is our recommendation on 1 provider. And if we go in a different route, and I'm looking at Robin to make sure I'm saying this the right way, is that's a different process. If we put more money into it, we can reject all at that point and put out for the bigger amount, and then don't put a number limit on it.
Is there a built-in appeal process to that?
There was a built-in appeal, and we did not get an appeal.
And there's a very clear window of time that is prescribed for that appeal?
Yes.
Okay.
So to your other point about what we can find out is, if it's the board's desire to augment this component and whatever RFP ends up, and I'm just pre-assuming for discussion purpose that St. John's is the one, I think there's enough information that's been thrown into this mix today, yesterday, last couple of weeks, that we do need our staffs to sit down and figure out what exactly, if that's what the board desires, what is it that we're purchasing, and to have clean audits, not get into the back and forth that I've observed this summer that we got into. The reason I share that is whatever way you go on this, but if you go in the process of funding and then St. John ends up with it, there is that cleanup component we got to do.
Is it possible, if I may?
Sure.
Is it possible to just act today to rope off, if it's the will of the board, to rope off a chunk, 700,000, that just sits there while you engage the kind of process you just described? Absolutely.
And I think to your point, we did go back and look at, I think you're right, the number that you threw out was 540,000, that's 9 months.
That's for the rest of the fiscal year.
The rest of the fiscal year.
Okay, well, just hold on that for a moment then, and then I would just go to the other two requests before us. I would just, when it comes to South County
Wait,
Service.
Sue Frost had something. Her name's on the board.
I know what she is, but I hadn't finished talking.
Oh, I thought she was on there before you started talking, so.
Well, yeah, because we were going down the line, though, and I thought we should, so Sue Frost, go ahead.
I just have a quick comment, and that's relating to South County and the staff's recommendation that, they clearly were not able to fulfill a contract with us, and we made a recommendation to go ahead and sign, and then we'll figure it out later. But I think on any contracts that we do, we not only need to vet those companies and know that they are financially qualified to deliver on the contract, but if they say they can't, we shouldn't sign a contract. We should go back to the RFP and pick the next person down. We should never get in a contract where we don't feel that they can fully fulfill that contract. And I hope we won't do that ever again.
Understood.
Okay. Being that we're on South County, I wanted to comment on that when we awarded the RFP last year, and I appreciate Ann's explanation, because I think it highlights the point you made just a moment ago, maybe in a different way, Supervisor Frost, but that there was this county provided through CalWorks, and again, I want to thank certainly Paul and Ann, because they were creative during the recession, and we worked to maintain services, and SETA was cooperative. It wasn't a perfect fit as far as the process, but that funding was in place. When we awarded the RFP last October, that money was in place. We had signals that money might be in jeopardy relative to CalWorks, but certainly that's what came true. And there was a hesitation. I will just say that, Ms. Powers, who's been before this board before, expressed serious reservations, and I think Ann, doing her best to exercise some discretion, recognizing that services were in jeopardy right at that very moment, and recognizing the board would have this before us. They conferred and obviously executed the contract. So I would just want to make it really clear there was no bait and switch here on behalf of the service provider. And the other thing is, and to Supervisor Kennedy's point, and yes, we had a disagreement at this board, and we made a determination to award to South County. Whether it's the 4 people that are here in the audience to provide the service or not, there's been an organization, and again, they've had to compete over time, that has been basically the outpost in the South County for provision of services. They've enjoyed the support of the community in many different ways. They don't go out and raise a lot of money, because as you can see, there's 4 of them. They provide those services. They're open 5 days a week. They happen to be today. They're here. They're down in the Delta. They're out in the Herald area. They're out in the rural portions of the county, and they also serve people who, again, they don't close their doors. If people come across the county line that associate with golf, that they're going to do their best to serve those folks. There are other organizations that do that through this county, but I would just tell you that I know personally, and it doesn't count for what we're going to do here today necessarily, that they've helped numerous folks, people who were in threat of losing their housing, who couldn't get gas to get to work, who couldn't fill out the forms that would help them qualify for DHA benefits, or at least get as a matter of record in consideration for whatever might they qualify for, and that makes a big difference. It really does, and it does in all of our communities. But I would tell you that this organization has been, a strong part of the fabric of that community for many, many years. Now, if they go away, will somebody else not reappear? I don't know. I mean, we had Salvation Army, and again, a good organization, but they had the umbrella that allowed them to bring national or international organization and support. Would it have been the same level of services? I don't think so, but maybe they would have been able to serve X number of people and meet the data requirements. They have a very personalized service. It makes a difference in the lives of people in that community, and it's people that I know have been helped, will continue to be helped, and I feel really strongly that if we can't find a way to do this in an existing contract, then we need to tailor something that allows us to have that before us for consideration. This county has been a partner. We provided support, and yes, we provide probably 85% of the support because they have an office with 4 people that do all those services to hundreds of miles of geographical area, small populations. They maximize by working with the churches. Again, they work with the local city, and 2 cities, cities of Isleton and city of Galt. And I just, again, to see the discussion, well, we didn't do this, we didn't do that. Okay, then let's, take the time out we need to do. But I just believe that if they go away, that our community will be far less forward in those areas of the county. And so, and I would just say this too, because NAV knows this as well as anyone. We've had this conversation over the course, and Susan, certainly you've been here a good deal of time. We've had a conversation almost every year about South County because we never figured out, from the time when we general funded this at about $300,000 about 15 years ago, and then, when things got tight, we got creative, and people worked to find the funding to provide those services, and we've done that. They've maintained that same amount. They haven't really increased, but it's to keep the organization in place that provides that service. And they're the linkage to Lifeline for a lot of people, and I feel really strongly about that. And I think, whatever we do today, we do. But I, for one, think we'd be deficiting the community in a great way if that organization has to close its doors. And again, but I want to make it clear, there was no attempt to deceive the county or to switch, bait and switch or something that, they knew they were going to run out of money. That wasn't the case at all. And if they're out of money and we can't find another way to address it in December, then I think it's a sad day. But it was not because they deceived this county. I want to be very clear about that. And I want to thank Ann and Paul for their work because, again, they've had to struggle with this. And again, this has been something this board's talked about for many years. I guess lastly, I just would go to Splash, an organization that likewise, you all said it, has been a strong partner with this community. I think they provide something that's very unique. We have a treasure in this community with the Mather Vernal Pools. They were a partner with the county. The county actually helped to establish Splash a lot with the sanitation district, and the city of Sacramento, I think, was some of the funding early on. And so things have changed. Maybe there's not a need for that particular element any longer, at least in the eyes of some. But I would say at a minimum that when they got teachers coming tomorrow, again, that wasn't our doing, that are going to sign up for the classes that bring those children and teachers out to the classroom that's out there in the field. They see vernal pools, they appreciate nature, but they also understand about water quality, about watersheds, what it means to be a good steward of the land and of our earth. I guess I would just hate to see us to basically say the rug slipped out and too bad, you're on your own, and maybe we're going to build some more trash traps at our waterway entryways, and that's going to be how we're going to spend the money. I think we have the money there. I think it's good stewardship of the money, and if we need to look at a transition, and I would advocate very strongly that we consider, Splash. If you have to go out to the RFP again, then we do that. I don't think anybody else does it like Splash, and they have the support of cities, of school districts, not necessarily financially to the degree that they need. And for $114,000, I think it's a great value as well. So clearly I feel pretty strongly about all 3 programs, and think that within this budget framework we certainly have the ability to set the money aside, I guess charge you with figuring out how we're going to move next on this, Mr. Gale, but that's my view on it. So Supervisor Frost, I'm done.
Well, I want to say I don't mean to I want to give you some advice. South County and any other nonprofit organization. The county isn't an endless funding source, so I mean we all wish we could fund everyone. I know I do. But there's other ways to raise money. You can do GoFundMe. There's a big day of giving in the spring. I know people that have made tens of thousands of dollars with big day of giving. Your city council, Rotary, Lions, Kiwanis, partnering with other larger organizations to be an extension of them in your community. Chamber businesses, you could have a spaghetti feed. You could launch an ongoing campaign to raise money, and when you do that, you raise you raise your presence in the community, you let everyone know they're a part of you, and it actually strengthens you, and it also gives you an opportunity to learn about what the real needs in your community are and how you can change and shift, because no business can stay the same and be successful. You have to change with the times. So I just wanted to say that, just to kind of get your minds thinking about that moving forward, whatever happens here, because that those kind of things can strengthen you and help you survive any loss of any funding. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Supervisor Kennedy.
Yeah.
Hey, Braden, please.
Someone say boo?
So I made my points on South County Services pretty clear, and again, it's nothing against South County Services, it's just more process than anything else. And I feel pretty strongly about that. On Splash is a little different. I'm a big fan of Splash. Emily, you know that. But I feel like we're, in order to help an organization that we all like and that we know does good work in certain areas, that we're trying to thrust upon a department head a contract for services he says he doesn't need. That's just not our role as county government. I mean, do I want to continue a relationship with Splash down the road? Absolutely. Do I think they do great work, and I hope we have opportunities to continue to work with them? Yes, but we're creating work, and that's it may make someone feel good, but it's just not good governance, not good public policy.
Okay.
Well, it sounds to me like if I had to pick one area where there's some common interest in perhaps doing what I suggested earlier, at least to identify some funding set aside, for lack of a better phrase, for St. John's, of the three challenges here, that might be the one that we try and tackle in the form of a motion first. I don't know if you want to, Mr. Chair, separate them.
That's fine. We can take them individually.
Well, I mean,
okay. So you're suggesting that we set aside.
Set aside the 700,000.
Well, define the 700,000 and
The
now
700
saying
is a 500.
540.
I think 540 is what Supervisor Natoli, you had mentioned.
It'd be three quarters, whatever three quarters.
three
They're
quarters
funded
comes
through
out to
September
that.
30th. So.
And I think to the statements made by our CEO about wanting to take some time to better understand exactly what it is they're asking for is wise, because it seems like there's been some wires crossed here, at least in the last 24 hours, with some communication from St. John. So I think that's a fair exercise while we at least just kind of put in escrow for the time being for final budget this amount. But I would move that we do that. I do think there's some merit in, if we're going to go down this path, figure out a set of criteria for a service provider, realizing that it's clear from the guidance from County Council that we really cannot say St. John's today. We have to say funding that may be used for a competitive bid process criteria has yet to be determined, that we make it clear that there's obviously an audit component to this. My understanding generally of St. John's is that there's been some reluctance to have DHA have some immediate DHA assistance and perhaps even on-site oversight to some degree. And maybe I'm confusing apples and oranges here in terms of different parts of their mission, but that's something that I've always kind of scratched my head about as to why there's a reluctance, if in fact there is. So there's a lot that I think needs to be, a lot of homework I think that staff needs to do. And then I'm not sure what the appropriate time frame would be to come back to the board with an alternative in terms of, putting out there the question of do we want to establish a new competitive bid process with this set of criteria? But I'm going to guess that could be done in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah. I would just weigh in that I would ask, because we're going to have back before us next week the item that relates to transitional housing, that we have an answer next
Want to
week.
do it at the same time?
Yeah, I think we ought to have an answer.
As long as we can have that, all those questions asked and answered.
Go ahead.
How if we endeavor to get those questions answered, we can give you a report. If we can't answer them in time frame, what's the time frame for us to get them done?
So I'm hearing a preference for the 12th.
Or 12th
Of what?
of September.
To at least give you
Answer.
an idea what, Paul, is that? I'm putting Paul out there. Let me make sure.
That would be extremely fast to bring people together to get those questions answered.
Okay, I'm hearing.
Well, they're in the audience, and so I think they're probably understanding the sense of urgency here.
If I could just leave, when we bring the other RFP, I know these are two different things.
Yeah.
If I can just have the ability to report back on where we are, give you the status, and come back to you as many times as we need to answer those questions. So I think we'll start the process to get something to you on the 12th. If we can't flow 19th is the next meeting? 12th? No, what's the next
What's the
meeting
fall?
after that? 26th? No later than the 26th.
Yeah, well, I think you endeavor to get back here on the 12th. Fast or not, it's an important issue, and the clock's ticking.
They'd have to have the staff report written tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I'd like to add, if we go that way, I'm going to be a broken record and again ask, I need to see where the money's coming from. Because last time I checked, all due respect to the chair, wanting, that we'll just fund both, there's not $540,000 sitting around in my sofa cushions.
So if that's the desire, we're waiting till the end. We will lower the contingency at this point. And that's where we'll take it out and not get into making programmatic cuts at this point.
So that's a declaratory statement at this point, right? That's a declaratory statement at this point by
Correct.
by you. Okay.
Okay.
So at least we go into this with that understanding.
Okay.
So that would
Be your motion?
that's the motion.
Okay. I'd second the motion.
I'd like to hear staff comment on what is it you're going to find out and report back to us on.
We want a very clear picture of what the county has been purchasing and what is it that if we move forward with 540,000, what is that we will be purchasing?
Okay.
Realizing that we cannot predetermine St. John's as the bidder on it, but some of the same questions we were asking about debt service, leverage, those kind of questions, and then access to the facilities, stuff that DHA needs. We just need to have a clear understanding what is it this engagement will look like, so then we can come up with a scope of service that we can then do an RFP based on that.
Okay.
It by no means implied or expressed in the motion is there on my behalf a assumption that this is in any way sole source. It can't be. I'm going into this with that legal opinion clear in my mind.
So another organization could potentially come in and answer the RFP and win it.
Yeah, depending on how that criteria ultimately would be set, assuming there's satisfaction by executive staff and us at the report back, that we would, that's one fork in the road. The next fork of the road is you go implement a competitive bid process.
And if you could, because again, we're going to have this matter properly before us next week, I'd like to see in writing, again, you've been kicking it around, but as to why, and again, maybe spend some time talking about how this board, when it's had similar matters before, and they've chosen to supplement, and maybe it's never been an exact circumstance where we said one, we decided we wanted to fund another one, and we had two qualified proposers, that we couldn't make that choice. Because I guess that needs to be a question that needs to be answered. I've heard it answered, but I guess I want to, have folks take a look at, the way we approached that in the past, and maybe it's crystal clear to some folks in this room, but certainly not crystal clear to me, having been on this board for some time. So that'll be part of the report back. So the motion is to appropriate
To do what?
To appropriate $540,000.
To set aside.
Set aside.
Yeah. And then with the understanding, I want all us to nod yes at the same time, that it's, if we decide to do this, whoever the successful agency that would come in to satisfy the criteria of a competitive process, that's coming from contingency.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Anything further? Okay, please vote.
Unanimous vote.
Okay, clear it. Please.
I don't think it. You need to vote again.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay. Then I would move to the next item, and that is that I do believe that the level of service in the South County would dictate to an amount that would, I guess, about $280,000 to $300,000. And I heard my colleagues that they're concerned about that, but maybe have to go through the same process. But I guess I'd like to set that money aside and then have you figure that out and get back to us with the same information, that if we can't extend under the current situation, and we know we've got a bit of time, that if we need to go out to some RFI to approach that. But I do believe that what it takes to provide that service has clearly been $300,000 plus or minus annually for the last 15 or 20 years. So whatever amount we had appropriated in the contract, I'd like to supplement it so that it would basically we'd rope off the additional. Is that $140,000?
I think I heard 130, but Brett, what you have?
They're funded for 160, are they not? I don't know. The number's been floating around here.
130 is what we've understood. About
130,000.
additional.
Okay. All right. And my motion would be that we set that aside. You can come back to us with a report because if it can't be done with South County, we can go out to an RFI and do you think tailored, if I understood correctly, Council, that we could, tailor the service in a way that it would be at least understood by this body and would, be clear what we want to purchase with those dollars, right? Okay. Okay, Mr. Kennedy?
Just clarification, are you RFI, RFP, RFQ? You've said RFI. Is that what you're, because in the past we've done RFP, I believe.
Yeah, RFI is what I would said, request for interest. RFA, RFQ, I think those in the whole, I thought there was a distinction without a difference, but there is a difference, so. And if RFI is okay, it's a simpler process, as I understand. Is that?
I don't know that gets you where you want to go.
Right.
So what, I just say RFQ?
Yeah.
Or an
RFP. See, that's
RFP.
RFP.
RFP is what we've done in the past in this type of contract.
If I could just offer, let's do RFP, because we get into Q and the I, there's different.
Don't forget the
A lot of
A.
wiggle room.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, I'll second the motion.
So, say it again. You're going to send an RFP, you want an RFP for the services, and then anyone can respond? Is that what you're saying?
I wanted to rope the money off. I wasn't set on the RFP, RFQ. I would ask you to come back and tell us what's the most appropriate method.
I can tell you it's RFP. That's what we will do at this point.
That's what we did before.
That's what we did.
No, it was RFA before.
Yeah, but I understand that, but I mean, lesson learned, it will be RFP.
Is it contingency funds?
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever we're discussing here went into the contingency.
Everything here, yeah. For the balance of the contracted year, so from January 1st to June 30th.
Right.
An RFP.
And that would give you the entirety of the funding source, then it would be available then we would know what it costs to provide the service for a year.
And part of the report back then will be, is that we'll gap from January to June, but next spring then, whatever the new dollar amount is, we need to do another RFP to make sure that we're,
Understood.
that we have that done for the next fiscal year, or a couple fiscal years.
Well, why don't you just annualize the amount? Why don't you do one RFP and do an annualized amount if you know that's what it's going to take? If it's going to take $300,000, that's what it takes.
Well, we don't have 300.
We already got 160 on the table. We're putting 130.
160 is going to be gone by January 1.
Right. And then 130 to finish it out.
130 to finish it. So whoever the successor is going to be, That's what we need to decide when we come back to you. Is this get them till June 30th? Is this a 1 year, 2 year contract? What is it that we're doing with this? Because part of the issue that we're going to run into, Supervisor Natoli, is I think, is that the department determined the needs assessment was 140. And that's part of the conversation we got to go back and have with them. So what is the real amount? Realizing that the past has told us 300, that's what South County had. So that's part of the report back, is what's the need assessment on it. And then if you do an RFP, what does the RFP look like?
You got me puzzled.
Okay, let me start over. So we're going to be out of money come December 1 if we stay with this contractor.
January 1,
January 1.
whatever.
We have to do, if we separate the money, we got to do something to get us to the end of the fiscal year. So part of what we're evaluating is that, is this RFP just from January to June? Or is this multi-year RFP that we're going to do?
Okay.
That's what we're going to come back and report to you. I'm not predetermining that it's only 6 months.
Okay.
Okay, so you want to come back on the same date as the previous?
Yes.
26.
Okay.
26.
26.
26. We're back at 26.
Yep.
Okay. And so the amount is 130 to supplement the 160, so it's 290 total in a calendar year for this fiscal year. For this fiscal year. Excuse me, for this fiscal year. Okay.
But you're going to come, but you have already evaluated that you didn't anticipate it should require that much funding. So you're going to come back and recommend for next year what next year should be, and we're just going to look at seeing how we can take care of the rest of this year.
That's part of what we're going to evaluate.
Okay. Is it clear to the board?
Yeah, we need the vote screen.
Please vote.
Unanimous vote.
Okay. So let me ask, for purposes of discussion here, that I don't know that I concur with Supervisor Kennedy about telling somebody that they don't need, or forcing them to have something they don't need. I think that they're still evaluating what they were going to do. And the permit, Michael, if you can come forward, I want to get something to answer. I don't want to state this incorrectly. We didn't get the new permit conditions until very recent, so it wasn't like we knew what that was going to contain. We had an idea, but that permit was given to us when?
It came into us within the past year, and we had an idea what it was going to include and what it wasn't going to include. So we knew that on the outreach education aspect, that it is not going to be as specific and stringent. We knew where the new permit was focusing, and that was in areas such as trash elimination.
Okay, but we've been sorting this out again. I certainly appreciate it in the spirit of cooperation that you and folks that work underneath you. I mean, there have been discussions over the summer about whether or not we could get into a contract. We hadn't drawn the bright line that said, no, we really don't need those services at all. We were looking at how we might incorporate, at least for this year, incorporate some aspects of creeks and stream, stewardship into that, recognizing that long term you might be going in a different direction.
We have been discussing that, but I will say that at a staff level early on, we did understand that to meet an obligation under the new permit, our splash for the class addresses it.
Right. Okay. So
Separate program.
It's a separate program. It's not field-based. It's in the classroom. It's
right. Well, and I guess I would say that if Water Resources has either discomfort and or they feel the nexus, well, the demand that we have to do it is gone. I don't know if the nexus is gone. I wouldn't even argue that. But that if we have an asset out there and we're trying to grow appreciation for it, we're going to invest millions of dollars in restoration and in preservation of the vernal pool preserve. We've got an organization that's been working to establish a science center that hopefully will be internationally renowned someday. And that's assisted us with some of the things that we want to achieve out at Mather. It would seem to me that we want to work with that partner over the long term to make sure that we, one, grow the awareness and appreciation for that asset, but also that hopefully some of the folks that would go through that program, and it's not solely our responsibility, but that some of the folks who go through that program would be, the future scientists and the mentors and the stewards, the teachers in this community. And we have some of those. I know that Emily's documented that. I guess I see us, basically kind of taking the carpet out, because now we aren't required to do this, and I'm not putting this off on Michael, but that I guess I would put in the category of some of the things that we want to do, we think we should do, and it makes good sense. That asset is ours to preserve and maintain. It's not just about putting a fence around it and saying, well, there's the vernal pools. It's about building some appreciation. So I'm going to argue that we ought to find $118,000 or $114,000, bridge it for this year, and let's come back and take a look at this over the course of next year. Emily's offered to do that with her curriculum. And I think certainly maybe Michael's department being a key part of that, but I think that this county ought to find the wherewithal to do this. And so I'm going to move that we, do that. And if you want to have figured out with Michael as an apportionment of that or whatever, but I'm going to move that we support this educational program for, if you need to go out to RFP, then, but I think part of the problem we have here is we had an existing contract. We've got teachers showing up tomorrow. And I think that presents a real problem. So I guess I'd ask, is there a creative way to address this under the umbrella of things that we do, having had a contract and we've been in discussions with them? Could you extend those services over a period of time, bridge them for?
It would be similar to the prior contract. That's all I can suggest.
Okay. Well, that's what I'm asking you, so that's helpful.
When you enter a contract, it has a beginning and an end, so this would be no different.
Okay, Robin, let me ask you, because this has been bothering me often. Is there no way under a contract that two parties can extend a contract? That a public agency can extend a contract with a private contractor if the money's there, the desire is there, and you do it in a public process? Or when the end date is the end date and it's all over with, game over? Because I've seen contract extensions. I see on some of the bodies I sit on, we go 14, 15 times contract extensions.
Well,
I'm using sanitation district's a good example.
Contracts have those terms. Contracts have those terms that allow for amendments, extensions.
Right. That's my question. Yeah.
Certainly, you can build in those terms, or by ongoing provision of services, you can have behavior extend until a recommitment.
Okay.
That's not my understanding of what took place here.
I think the contract's expired. I think that's the issue here. The contract's expired.
It's a dead contract.
Dead contract.
So we would have to enter into a new contract.
Right.
And that's the issue at hand, getting into the new contract. This previous conversation we just had.
Okay. I'm going to go back over ground we just covered. So then why, when we have a contract with St. John's or South County, you couldn't extend or redo the terms? St. John's, for example, why couldn't you extend that contract? Why do we have to, knowing that you may have to go out to RFP ultimately, I get that. But again, I'm not a lawyer like Mr. Kennedy or you, but I'm just going to say that if, say you're under contract, why can't you then, if there's willing parties, as long as there's no prohibition against extending that?
Both parties have to change their position. If a contract, if money has ended, the ability to perform the services has exceeded the funds allowed. To grant more money, you have to increase services.
Well, yeah, you buy it for another year. That's what I'm saying. So you increase services. So you buy. That's why I say extend it. You buy more services.
But we're rebuying.
Huh?
You already bought it for a year.
We already bought it. It's bought and paid for by the end of December.
They're saying they can't deliver.
They're saying they can't deliver those services.
Okay, no.
So that's the decision
I'm
for
asking
the
about.
board.
I said St. John with St. John's. Okay, I got it with South County. So with St. John's, why couldn't we just extend with them?
I think the analysis of staff had been that there were other providers that were providing. Paul, I'm turning to you for the decision and recommendation of staff.
The issue with that one is that there's an RFP that was done. It's not that we cut their funding. That's not what happened here. There's a decision that we did an RFP, and I understand that it is where we are. In the RFP process, they're not getting the new contract. That's what the recommendation is. They're approaching the county now saying, Yeah, we get it that we're not going to get that, but you still got to continue contracting with us. That's the issue at hand.
And the issue, frankly, the issue of a formal appeal versus a personal plea. And whether there's a majority of board members who want to put this into a process that meets legal muster.
Okay, so then I want to ask one other question. I'm going to go back to your splash. We never had an opportunity to even revisit this then. I mean, basically, contract expired. There's been discussions with staff and the provider of service throughout the summer, in good faith. But there's a time sequence to that relative to teachers and to enrollment and such. But we never had an item before us in June that said we're going to, reconsider this or that contract. It's basically been this discussion. There's been a different direction, new permit conditions. So now, when do we consider this?
Well, if I could say to that,
Yeah.
which is similar to the Social Services Department this morning, staff in the last budget year were given a budget and parameters and direction, and this board, in its direction, empowered the CEO to supervise department heads to maintain their performance within the budgetary constraint of the last budget year. And that's when those decisions were made in their experience and expertise through fiscal analysis and performance analysis and the department head's discretion and recommendation by the executive staff. That's when those decisions were made. I don't believe that the governance is performed on a task-by-task basis at the department level every time a contract expires.
Well, if I recall that in the contract that was approved a year ago, in the
an end date.
Huh? With an end date, but it said there may be a revisiting of it. It didn't say that we weren't going to bring you a contract any longer. That wasn't what was said. That wasn't a board action. And there's been discussion over the years for, we're going to use a program that's in question right here with Splash, where we've provided that support. We were never given the opportunity in the context of deciding in the governance whether we wanted to continue that or not. It didn't come to us in May or June or in the budget. It basically expired and went away.
So when we entered the contract, I'm looking at Michael to help me. I'm not intimate with the contract, but it has an end date to it. That's what we brought to you last June, said this is the budget that we're doing. Here's the contract behind it. So the contract's expired for the last couple of months.
Oh, I know, I'm aware of that.
So, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, the contract did have an expiration date. The staff report did reference that we would be looking at the possible reprioritization of our needs, and that's what we did, but that wasn't carried out in the context of bringing that contract back to the board prior to its termination. So the point is that we've ended the support for the element, the outdoor classroom for Splash. Now that may be a very prudent decision or not, but we never really had a chance to discuss that. And I guess that's where this whole thing about policy, getting ahead of it, because again, I, for one, want to have that conversation. We're having it right now, this very moment. But, now we're out of contract, that it requires doing this and that. And I don't want to review every contract that is entered into by departments in this county. I respect your authority, Mr. Gill, and yours, Mr. Peterson, and everybody else in this organization. But I'm telling you, this really feels a lot different than any other budget cycle I've been in my 23 years on this board. I'm just going to tell you that, very frankly. That whether we vote something up or down, is whether something I support or not, I want the opportunity to have that discussion before this board with my peers. Whatever our decision is, I respect that. And I also know that during budget, that when it comes to matters of fiscal importance, 3 of us can act on it, where any other time out of context, it's going to require 4 of us. And that's fine. That's the way the rules are written. And so now, basically, teachers are going to show up tomorrow. They're out of contract. I don't know what Emily's going to tell folks. And again, that's not my problem, but I feel badly for the students and for the teachers and anybody else who at least was under the premise that we were going to continue this. It may have been a false assumption, but this feels a whole lot different than any other budget session I've sat in all my years on the Board of Supervisors. And I'm just going to say that. It doesn't count for anything, but it counts for enough to say that I'm a bit amazed
that we don't have within the realm of what we're talking about here today. And now we're to have that conversation, and we've got all these, we're going to go in and have a lot more process, and we're going to spend a lot more money, and things that we've done in budget, I believe, at least in the past. And again, whether there's differences or not amongst this board, that is lesser concern to me than, because I guess what I need to be on is an alert. Then when somebody comes to me in the springtime and said, something's going to, with contract, that we're not going to continue to work at this level, we're going to get on the board agenda for the conversation. Because if that's the trap we get into, that this is it, that's what the contract says, you're done.
Well, Supervisor Natoli, I think in my 10 years here, this is different, I'll give you that. But this is the first time we've gotten into contract level discussions. Because previously when contract issues will come up, they will come up through the department, there will be some resolution, there would have been a process, something would have been done, and it was complete. This year, the 3 items that are here didn't really come up to us in the context to resolve them.
I talked to you with South County in spring.
But hold on a second, let me finish my thought. South County, we did an RFP, we made a recommendation, we executed a contract on what the good faith was that we thought. It's an augmentation. We don't have the authority to augment any of it. This is the place to talk about it.
Right.
Splash, I don't know, whatever process that they go through signing teachers, contract expired in June. Well, for the conversation, I'm looking at Michael, there's not been a whole lot of conversations about it. If there was a desire not to have the contract extended, it never came up to us. In the past, it would have come up to us.
Who's to us?
In the executive staff, or even to Michael.
Well, Michael Penrose knew too. I mean, Michael Penrose briefed me on
Then
this.
it's a communication problem on our side. What I'm getting at is all these items that you have here, they all became somehow, there was no appropriation for us. Department heads were out of money. Michael had no appropriation. That's why we're sitting here, because somehow this communication's gotten sideways as it became political. St. John's became political. Rather than coming, there's an RFP process, didn't do whatever needs to be done, and now the ask is, I know I'm not going to get that money, I need additional money to continue the program. That's what's being asked. That's why this is so different. We didn't believe, and talking to county council, that we had that kind of authority to look at somebody and say, we can fund you for X, Y, Z. We don't have that authority. Then even if we were to fund it, we don't have the authority to let out an RFP at this point. That's why this is different. Previous years, a couple of other contracts, by the time it came to you, we already worked that out. And how we worked that out, there would have been a process. That's the difference. We ran out of money, we didn't have the budgetary authority, and then we got into the procurement issue that county council's brought up, is that we didn't have the authority to do the procurement. So this actually starts the process of fixing this. I understand the teachers are there, I know that risk, but I do believe this is a positive thing that we actually have a process set up in motion, and if there are contracts that are expiring, and we can set up a different process on that. We can come back to you. There's no reluctance on our part to do that.
So when it comes to if we want to do an educational program,
you tell us that. I mean, if you want an educational in the South and Maker, you tell us that. Okay. And I think Michael has indicated that there is some funding, right, and we can do a process to award that and problem solved.
Okay. We just treat it as new, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's a new contract.
Yeah. If I might add, I think there's a question on the table regarding Splash in regards to the county isn't the only funder for Splash programs. There are private sector, as I understand it, and other jurisdictions within the county that provide funding to Splash. And this conversation is focused as if the county was the exclusive funder for Splash programs. There are other sources of funds there. So when it comes to the continuation of programs, well, whatever process is playing out, I think there's a broader question perhaps directed at Splash in terms of funding beyond the county to support ongoing activities. just wanted to add that to the discussion.
Oh, and I think that they've been doing some of the outreach, Rob. I think you're aware of that, Michael, is that they've reached out to some of the school districts and so forth to broaden their funding stream. But I think, the piece where we actually have the physical locale and part of it goes to the transport of the kids to get them actually to that, classroom, because a lot of the school districts, whether that's a choice they make or not, I don't think that they don't fund that, and so they have to be arranged as part of that. I think assist both in the curriculum in the classroom, but also what goes on in that field experience for young people. I mean, and again, we're not the only ones, but the classroom piece of it, granted, there are other funders, but that's a 90-minute presentation in the class. And so again, I just think that the vernal pools and holiday night is important enough, and I would say that I think we should tailor a program, and I'm prepared to move that we set aside $115,000. You can come back to us next week with the rest of the stuff and tell us how you're going to go about figuring that out.
I don't even think I need to come back on that. I mean, if that's what the board wants to do, it's an RFP at this point. We'll issue an RFP.
Okay.
The only reason the other two are because there's questions about, the first one, St. John's, there's questions about what facts we have. I think we need to have that clearing of the air out. And the same thing goes for South County. Need assessment said 140, they're running it at 300. That's a discrepancy there. We need to answer that back to you. This one, I'm not hearing anybody say it's not 114. I respect what Michael said, that from their vantage point, the permit doesn't require it. Right. It's going to become a school function next school year. So how far do we go into this? This could be a one-year contract.
Could be.
And that's it. But again, the understanding again, Supervisor Natoli, is we had an end date to this contract. This wasn't like we didn't put an end date. There was a beginning and end to it.
Right. No.
And again, when this contract comes up, again, there's going to be a beginning and end
to it. Sure, there will be. And exactly. There's no arguing that. But my point being is that then if we were going to have a conversation about what might come next, that, both in the realm of the stormwater permit and program, and maybe there's going to be a workshop before this board, but also as it relates to, what happens out at the vernal pools, then we should have been able to have had that, either coincidental with the contract expiration or in advance of that. That's what I'm saying. And I'm not talking about every contract in every department, but there are certain aspects of what we do publicly in engaging young people of different ages, people who are in need, that I think that we ought to have that ability. And so that maybe that's part of what you're going to parse out over the course of the, but we didn't have a lot of appeals here today, but this is one I think that, requires our attention and probably should have been here for that conversation. But now it is. It's properly.
It is. And again, I'm going to make one point and I'll be quiet about it. The contractor bears some responsibility too.
Sure they do.
I mean, if you know your contract's going out on June 30th, this shouldn't be a September 6th or September 7th conversation. I'm just putting it through my prism.
Right.
If I was running that organization, I'd have been in Michael's office beating down the door. Maybe she did it. I've been down there in February.
Yeah.
And then our system then should have picked it up, and we should have had a conversation about it.
And there's been a lot of conversations.
And I'm not saying that it did or did not happen, but I just want to make that clear that this is not just the county didn't do something. We honored our contract. We made the payments timely. We did everything we were supposed to do.
All that's accurate, but there were people that made it into. Yeah, Mr. Sir.
I'm prepared to second, but I want to restate it. Well, I thought.
Yeah, I move that we allocate $115,000 for an educational program, and you can come back with this particular funding sources. I think some stormwater utility should go into it, but you can make that determination. And that if you need to go out to an RFP, then I give you that direction, and then you can go with it. That's a motion. So
I want to hear from Supervisor Kennedy. I think he's punched up.
Yeah, I'm not going to support the motion, and it's not a thing that I'm doing easily, but because I believe that we're looking for a place to spend money rather than waiting for a proposal to come before us that we deem as necessary and responsible and helpful. Because we have a good relationship with an organization in the past, I don't find that justifies doing this from the dais. I think that this is the type of decision that should culminate from a supervisor to staff or staff to the board, but we're doing this from an organization coming to us where there's no identified need. Good to have, yes. Need to have, no. and we are kind of circumventing process in order to help someone, an organization that we think is a good organization, and that to me just is not good governance.
Okay, Ms. Ross?
I'm going to concur. I think Splash is a great organization, but we have to substantiate a need for every dollar that we spend, and I can't support this for the same reasons. Sorry.
Okay.
I'll second the motion, and the only statement I'll make is that in my 6.5 years on the board, I've become pretty intimately familiar with the good work that Splash does. Do we need them? In my opinion, I think we do. I think they serve a very valuable purpose here in the community, both from the perspective of being good stewards of the land, but being good stewards of young minds too, to help groom them to appreciate the fact that we do have dwindling resources, namely in the form of our wetland complexes in that part of the county, and they go over and above in my estimation, so I'm prepared to support the motion.
Okay. All right, nothing further, please vote.
It's a tie vote, so the motion
Fails.
Fails, sorry.
Okay. All right, those were the pending requests that were outstanding. And I guess that brings us back to budget wrap. Mr. Ferguson, you've stayed out of the crossfire pretty well since early this morning, so. We have budget resolutions.
So, Mr. Chair, there's no actual resolutions at this point. The resolutions will come back to the board at the end of September for formal adoption. At this point, we're requesting that the board approve the attached budget schedules, which are part of the budget document, the state schedules, which would amend the 2017-18 approved budget as revised by the board, including the supplemental adjustments that were proposed by the county executive. Direct the Department of Personnel Services to prepare an administrative salary resolution amendment to reflect the positions approved by the 2017-18 adopted budget, including any deletion of positions. Direct the Department of Finance to prepare the 2017-18 budget resolutions for board consideration on Tuesday, September 26, 2017, and then approve the list of CIP project changes that are attached to the agenda item in your budget packet that reflect mostly things like encumbrance carry forwards and other adjustments.
So, if I could?
Yeah, sure, Mr.
So the only adjustment to that, knowing that would be what's referenced in a motion, would be the Mather
right.
Correct.
schedule of the Mather workshop, or whatever we're going to call it.
That's incorporated.
Coming back on that.
That's in it?
That's in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then this also does take care of the two items for St. John's and South County. By reference, we'll come back to you no later than 26 on what process we'll follow. And it reduces the contingency. At the same time, we'll up DHA's budget for that reduced contingency.
Right.
Okay. What was just read into the record by our executive staff is my motion, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Phil, I have to make the motion, I think, in order to drop out the Mather stuff.
I think it's just a scheduling issue, isn't it?
No, this actually
Oh,
gets,
she's other items, CIP, so.
she's got.
No, I got
Mather
CIP and budget.
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Do you want to take that first, and then we'll?
Yeah.
Yeah, what he said. Move to adopt the recommended amended fiscal 17-18 approved budget and schedules except for the following items on the screen. Need a second for that.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded to approve the budget schedules with the exclusions of those that showed it on the screen. Please vote.
Unanimous vote?
Okay. Any other motion?
No, then I'm going to abstain on the next motion for the balance of the items.
Okay.
So I moved the balance of all the items.
Okay, moved and seconded for the balance of the items. Please vote.
And the mo-
Abstention by-
And the motion carries with Supervisor Peters abstaining.
Okay. All right. Is that it on the budget?
That's it.
So you don't want to do number 2, 3, and 4?
CIP. Then
That was part of the recommendation. Do you want to take separate actions? I assume
Yeah,
you
on
were
the
doing them all at
CIP,
once.
I have to have separate action. So I guess by my previous motion, it included 2 and 3.
Correct. Okay.
And then on item 4, the capital improvement plan, I'd like to move approval and note the exceptions on the screen from the capital improvement budget.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded to approve the CIP with the noted exclusions as projected on the screen. Please vote.
And then I'll be abstaining on the second motion.
I'll move the balance.
Unanimous.
Okay, so the balance of CIP, those that were on the screen, is now in the motion. Okay. Please vote.
And the motion carries with Supervisor Peters abstaining.
Mr. President, to all the members of the board, I just wanted to take this moment very quickly, thank the board members of all the budgets prepared, and I think I agree with Supervisor Cerna. This was the toughest summer we've had, but I think we're in a much better spot. We got a lot of stuff funded that we need to start implementing, and I'm looking forward to working with you and with our staff to get that implemented. And I can't thank you guys enough. Thank our executive staff, department heads, everybody that participated on this. That's a job well done.
Okay.
Right
Thank
back at you.
you, Dan.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the staff.
Yes, thank you. Okay, supervisor comments. I do have an adjournment, and I don't know, Mr. Executive, anything else you, for the record?
I've done enough today.
Said enough.
Hey, supervisor comments. All right. With that, again, expressing thanks to all who worked on the budget. I want to today adjourn in honor of Deputy Robert French, Sacramento Sheriff's Deputy, who was some 20 years with the Sacramento Sheriff's Department. Last week this time, obviously, was involved in a very serious incident in which he lost his life. There were other officers from the California Highway Patrol that were wounded. Quite a chase that ensued, but obviously the suspect was apprehended and subsequently passed away as well. But today we certainly focus our thoughts and our prayers on the fact that we lost a deputy who had sworn his, take his oath of office and sworn his allegiance to serving the public in a way that put his life on the line every day. And unfortunately, he perished, and I know that this community certainly grieves along with his family, his children, and other significant members of his family. And so with that, would note that today we're going to adjourn in memory of Deputy Robert French. The services are tomorrow, and I know that a number of us will be attending those services, and certainly in our own way reach out to the family and to those in the Sheriff's Department who lost a honored friend and someone who was very, very courageous in the line of duty and lost his life serving the public that he so loved and served so well. So I don't know if any other members wanted to add anything to that. But yes,
I would just say he was a member of the POP team for the North area and was active in Arden Arcade and Carmichael and Fair Oaks, North Highlands, and knew a lot of people. And it's unfortunate to have 2 years after Danny Oliver was murdered to have the same thing happen at another motel in the district. We're going to be talking about that in the future. And wanted to pass along my condolences for the members, residents of my district, to his family and the department.
Thank you, Susan. All right, thank you for those comments. If nothing else, then we will adjourn today's meeting in honor and recognition of Deputy Robert French.